last few episodes, we've broken this case apart piece by piece. The timeline, the phone data, the confession that set everything into motion. And what we found is that some of it just doesn't hold. So now we come back to something else. The testimony. The testimony that helped secure the convictions. Jason Autry. Because if this case stands, it stands on what he told that jury. And in this episode, we're going to test that. Not by listening to it straight through, but by putting it under pressure against itself, against other accounts, and then against something that doesn't change. The question is simple. Does it hold up? Because if it doesn't, then that changes everything. Welcome back, listeners, to Dark Dialogue Distilled. Today, I want us to sit with one piece of this case, Jason Autry's testimony, because the more that I've gone back through it and started lining it up against everything else, the more it just starts to fall apart. We've already put the timeline under pressure. We've already broken down the phone data, and we've already taken apart the confession that pointed investigators in this direction in the first place. And every time we do that, the same problem keeps showing up. Things just don't line up. As it stands right now, Zach Adams' post-conviction hearing is wrapped, and we're still waiting on the ruling. That decision could come at any point, and when it does, it's going to come down in large part to the credibility of the testimony that helped to secure those convictions, Jason Autry. So instead of walking through that testimony start to finish, we're going to test it. We're going to take what he said, compare it to what he said later, compare it to other accounts, and compare it to the evidence. And then we're going to see if it actually holds together. Now, years after that testimony, Jason Autry gave an interview in which he recanted. That interview was conducted by Dr. Katie Spirko, a forensic and clinical neuropsychologist working alongside Tennessee criminal defense attorney Dana McLendon III. Together, they make up the Trial and Error podcast, which has taken an extensive and ongoing look at this case, the evidence, and the convictions that came out of it. Now, in that interview, Autry claims the story that he told at trial was not based on memory at all. He says it was something that he put together to avoid spending the rest of his life in prison or getting the death penalty. And he built it using discovery evidence, cell phone records, information that he had access to at the time. And so that changes the question, because now it's not just whether the story is accurate, it's whether it came from memory in the first place or whether it was constructed. And when you actually listen to that interview, something else stands out almost immediately. He doesn't describe remembering that day. He describes relying on something else. At one point, he says flat out that he couldn't tell you what he did other than whatever the phone records say he did. Now, think about that for a minute, because that's not a gap in memory. That's a replacement of memory. And then he goes even further. He says the story itself was put together in about 3 days, built using phone records, statements, and the information that he had access to at the time. So now when you go back to the testimony, the confidence, the detail, the structure, you're left with a totally different question. Are we really hearing memory, or are we hearing something that was assembled? And when you put these accounts next to each other and test them against the timeline and the evidence, you don't just get inconsistencies. You get totally different versions of the same events that cannot possibly all be true. Now, before we compare Jason Autry to any other account, we have to start with his own statements, because if a story is accurate, it should remain internally consistent when the same person tells it. And as you listen to this, there's something else that starts to stand out, a phrase that just keeps coming up. As I testified before, over and over and over again. That's not how people usually recall events. That's how someone refers back to a version that they've already given.
How far away were you? How long did it take you to get there?
Probably 20 to 30 minutes.
And on cross-examination,
Do you remember where you were when you had that conversation with Mr. Adams?
Probably in the general location of the interstate. Somewhere in that, maybe not directly sitting at the interstate, but in that general location.
Okay, so how long would it have taken you to get to Shane Austin's trailer?
I'm not directly sure. I mean, precisely the minute,
Well,
10, 15 minutes maybe.
same drive, same morning, same person telling the story. And now the time is cut in half. That's not a small discrepancy. That's a structural change to the timeline, because the moment that drive goes from 30 minutes to 15 minutes, you create space for events that didn't fit before. And when a timeline expands under pressure, it's not memory sharpening, it's adjustment.
We traveled Pugh Road, Duck Farm Road, Dry Branch Road, Morgan Creek Road, Warren Hill Road, to the location right here.
And now what he said across.
Farm Road, you said?
Well, I think we got off Duck Farm Road and got on McElwain
Okay,
Road.
so tell me McElwain Road's next. And then where do you go next?
Let's see. We come to Sugar Tree, take a left. We go over Morgan Creek Road, over to Birdsong Road.
Okay.
So when he describes the route on his own, it's clear, it's confident, it's direct. But the moment that a map is introduced, something fixed, something that can actually verify where he went, the route changes. And that's the difference. A map doesn't add information. It just tests what's already there. So when the route shifts under that kind of pressure, that's not memory becoming more accurate. That's the story being adjusted to fit what's in front of him.
Of the pickup, Mr. Adams was digging in a fanny pack. I told him, I said, this fucking bitch is still alive. We just stopped for a second. I walked to the front of the truck. And I told Jack, I said, she's heard my name called and heard me talking and all.
And on cross-examination,
You said this fucking bitch is still alive.
Those exact words.
Okay. What did you say next?
Everything stopped and we met at the front of the truck. At the hood. And I looked at him and I said, she's heard my name and us speaking. At that time,
How would she have heard your name at that point? She's in the back of the truck the whole time this is going on.
we were discussing burying the corpse at Shane Austin's.
No, you didn't, because I specifically, he said he needed your help,
Burying the body.
and I asked you specifically what was said. You never said he said your name.
Your Honor, I object.
this is where it becomes much harder to explain away, because now we're not comparing different parts of the day. We're comparing the same event under oath. On direct, he introduces something critical, that the victim heard his name, that his name was called out. That's not a small detail. That's a moment that changes the stakes of the entire situation. But when it's tested on cross, the detail disappears. He acknowledges he never actually testified to that before, or he did, or he's confused, or everything falls apart. And that's important, because this isn't about forgetting a minor point. This is the whole reason for the murder. This is about introducing something new and then stepping back from it when it's challenged. And when that happens under oath, it raises a totally different kind of question. not just what he remembers, but how exactly is this story changing and evolving? If it's the truth, that's just not how true stories are told.
When is the next time that you saw or spoke to Zach Adams that day, if you did?
At approximately 2:15, I established contact again.
Hey, that's mighty big words. I established contact. Who called whom?
I called.
Okay.
I initiated the call.
I didn't tell the jury about it.
And I asked him, was they together? Could I get another pill? And he said, yeah. That Densmore was over at Dottie's. Victor Densmore was over at Dottie's. We would run over there and get the pill. And I told him, I said, we're going to have to hurry up. I got to be back over here at the Quick Mart at 3:30. This was approximately 2:30 when I arrived back at 235 Adams Lane.
And now what he said across.
So why would you then call him at 2:35 if you were already at his house?
Well, maybe I arrived at 2:38. I mean, I'm testifying that I got there around 2:35.
So why would you call him if you were already about to be there? Why did you call him a second time and talk to him? Why did you try to call him a second time?
Now, I don't recall that, but if your records reflect that, I'll agree that I made that call.
And here we have the same problem again, but even tighter. He says that he arrives at Zach's location. He's already there, but then he calls him. Calling someone is a way of bridging distance. It means you're not already in the same place. So now you have two positions at the same moment, already there, and still trying to make contact. And those don't just coexist. And this is just his own testimony. No other witnesses, no cell phone data, no timeline, just his own version of events. And it doesn't stay consistent because, of course, memories can fade, details can blur, but they don't just reorganize themselves into two totally different stories just to make the story work. So just from his own testimony, before bringing in any other witness, before bringing in anything else, you already have shifting timelines, routes that change under pressure, locations that don't stay consistent, and a sequence of events that cannot fit within the time available. And that's important because this isn't what memory looks like when it fades. Memory loses detail. It doesn't reorganize things. It doesn't try to make anything work. Now, up to this point, everything that we've looked at has been Jason Autry contradicting himself. But now we bring in something else, another version of the exact same events, Dylan Adams' confession. And when you put these two side by side, you're not looking at small differences. You're looking at different versions entirely, different versions of what happened. Now, we've already broken down Dylan's confession, how it was given, how it was deployed, how it was developed, and the issues inside it. So we're not going to revisit all of that here. What we are going to do is much simpler. We're going to take what Dylan said, and we're going to put it next to Autry's version, and we're going to see if the two can exist at the same time.
Right. Actually, I'm going to back up to the night before, April the 12th. 2013. Do you remember the night before?
I do.
All right. Where did you spend the night of April the 12th?
310 Benco Hills.
And whose house was that?
Angela Smith Scott.
And what does Dylan have to say?
I was at Autry come up whatnot. We dumbed out, we gunned out, and they ended up leaving. I mean, they left about 1 o'clock. And I did not see them. Did not have no knowledge of what they was doing. till they come back.
These accounts are supposed to describe the same starting point, but they don't. Dylan places Autry there, present, and very involved. Autry places himself somewhere else entirely. So if the starting point doesn't match, then everything that follows is built on two totally different foundations.
So I'd like to go back through your version of events that day. You say the night before, you spent the night at Angela Smith Scott's house.
I believe I testified to that, yes.
And then what the TBI said and has Dylan confirm.
Zach Adams, Jason Autry, and you at Zach's house. No doubt, no question in anybody's mind. Plan got hatched out to not just any girl, but while sitting around smoking dope, getting high, plan got hatched out to go get Holly Bobo herself.
So now in Dylan's version, this is something that's discussed. It's something that's building. In Autry's version, it isn't. He describes it as something that he didn't know anything about. That's not detail. That's the difference between a planned event and something unexpected. And those are not the same story.
Do you have an estimate of what time you reached Shane Austin's trailer?
After 9.
After 9 o'clock. Okay. So when you got there, you said you see the white Nissan pickup truck parked down by the trailer.
That's correct.
And you said there's a gate there. I'm assuming the gate is closed because they have a dead body on the other side?
The gate was open.
The gate was open, okay. You have a specific memory of that?
I mean, the gate was open.
Okay.
I mean,
And so you go in, what do you do next?
I pull up behind the white Nissan 4x4, step out. I view a fire burning, large fire. Dylan Adams standing at the door without a shirt on. Shane Austin running around hollering, y'all need to hurry up and get the goddamn hell out of here.
And you said, describe this burn barrel to me.
Describe the burn barrel?
Yes.
55-gallon barrel with all the paint off of it, with flames shooting at the top of it, 3 to 4 foot high.
Flames are 3 to 4 feet high?
With a strong smell of fuel and the components of meth burning in the air.
Okay. So what do you do next?
I purchased the pill.
And who did you purchase the pill from?
Shane Austin,
And how much did Shane Austin charge you for the pill?
$50.
$50. So what did you do what did you say to Shane Austin to purchase the pill?
I'm here. Can I buy a pill? Can I get the pill? I'm ready to get high.
And did you know for sure he would have one?
I did.
How did you know he would have one?
In the conversations that we had
With Zach?
with Zach, and I may have even had some conversations through texting back and forth with him.
So you think that maybe...
I knew they were together,
Right.
is what I'm getting at.
So you have a memory of texting Shane Austin that morning about pills?
That's correct.
Okay. And so you knew one would be available.
Once I was told that they were at Cuz's house, I mean,
Now you
this
noticed...
is self-explanatory.
Okay. You noticed the body in the back of the truck right when you pulled up, isn't that right?
That's incorrect.
Okay, so you didn't notice if there was a body in the back of the truck.
I purchased the pill and went and got high,
Okay.
and then come back and asked Mr. Adams what he needed assistance with. At that time, he said, burying this body. And I told him that I said, God damn, I ain't know about little Joe. And he said, Jason, it's not JoJo, it's Holly Bobo.
And then the TBI retelling that Dylan agrees to.
Who did what first to Holly once you got her in the house? Okay. What exactly did he do to her? What was all the clothes her? Everything stripped her naked. Okay. Then how much of his own clothes did he take off? He didn't do his full. He didn't take them off his legs, he just dropped them down. How did he hold her against that couch?
He bent her over. He held her arms out, pushed her down over it so she couldn't get away.
Over the end of the couch. Yes. Okay. What all did he do to her?
Okay.
Okay.
What do you mean both ends?
When you say both ends, you gotta help me out there because literally, did they make her perform any oral sex?
No. I ain't no
Vaginal sex with her. You know what Jimmy did first? I'm assuming you're standing there watching. There you go. And then, how long?
45 minutes.
Well, was she still conscious, fighting, saying no?
What at first when she was taking her clothes off, she tried to get her.
When she was taking, did they make her take her clothes off? Or did
They was taking the clothes off.
Okay. Who's they?
I said,
See, they is plural. I'm not trying to pick on you, but when you say they, I need to make sure we understand we're saying the same thing. Are you saying that Autry alone is the one that took her clothes off her?
Now the location changes. One account places this inside Zach's house. The other places it somewhere else entirely. And once the location shifts, then you're no longer talking about different perspectives. You're talking about totally different events altogether, because the same event does not happen in two places at the same time.
All right, and so while you were having this conversation with Zach, where was Dylan?
Dylan never came out of the trailer.
Right. Where was Shane?
Continuing putting stuff into the burn barrel.
Did you say putting stuff into the burn barrel? Could you see what he was putting into the burn barrel?
The smell was an appearance of camp fuel and meth. It was a large blaze. The area was tight, and you could smell the smell of a meth lab burning.
Okay, I understand what you could smell, but could you see what he was putting in?
I could not say. I never made it that far down. I never made it past the door of that 4x4 front.
The door. I didn't hear the door. What?
I never made it past the truck door.
You said earlier that Shane was saying y'all got to hurry up and get out of here. Did he say why?
He had a satellite. He said there was a guy coming to install a satellite, and he didn't know what time he'd be there.
So you had him saying satellite guy, cable guy, whatever's coming, and throwing things in the burn barrel. You had Dylan first at the door with no shirt on and then never came out, correct?
That's correct.
This conversation took place between you and Zachary Adams there between his truck and your cruiser.
That's correct.
How does that compare to what Dylan said?
when they came back later that day, that morning.
Now, when is the real time that they got back to Zach's house? Best you remember.
9:30 to 10.
9:30 to 10, got back there. Brought her in. Who raked her first?
Okay.
Who raked her second?
I did.
Who raked her third?
Okay.
And now this is where it just becomes unavoidable. In Autry's version, Dylan isn't involved. He never leaves the trailer. In Dylan's own statement, he is involved, present, and participating. And that's not something that can just be adjusted away. You're either there or you're not. And both of these accounts are describing the same events. So this isn't a difference in memory. It's a direct contradiction. When you put these accounts next to each other, they don't reinforce each other. They don't fill in gaps. They conflict on sequence, on location, on roles. And at that point, you're not comparing details anymore. You're choosing between versions of what happened. And up to this point, we're still inside the stories, comparing what's said to what's said. But there's another layer to all of this, one that doesn't rely on memory, and it doesn't change when the story does. That's the timeline. The timeline doesn't work like that. It doesn't rely on memory. It doesn't change under pressure. It doesn't reorganize itself to make a story fit. It's built from things that are fixed: time, distance, movement. And once you start applying those constraints, everything that we've just heard has to exist inside of them, or it doesn't exist at all. To understand how this works, you have to understand what this data actually represents. In his testimony, Jonathan Reeves, who specializes in cellular analysis, breaks down how phones connect to towers and how those connections reflect movement and location.
But when we're talking about the sectors now, in each case for those sectors, the signal is going to be coming from that same location at the tower. And the antenna that's pointing towards you will always have stronger signal than the antenna pointing away from you, just by the nature of the physics of it. So when you start walking your way, let's say you walk around that, and so if you went like this, you would, by necessity, as you went into each sector, you would always be onto the sector that you are in the main beam of. Okay. Now, the exception would be is as you traveled out of this sector around into the next one, you would have some area in here where you would be still on this one, but this sector would be getting stronger. And there was actually a reference made by Agent Frizzell to side lobes or back lobes, and indicating that it's possible to get on a sector that's pointing away from you. The reality is in this scenario, that would, I'd say never. I'm going to say 99.999% of the time, engineering term, never happen. The reason for that is that all of this signal, the vast majority of the signal is coming out here, and any signal from this antenna that would be in the back lobe would be so weak that the signal in the main lobes of the other antennas would be much, much stronger.
Now, what he's describing there is simple. A phone connects to the antenna that provides the strongest signal, and that signal comes from the direction that the antenna is pointed. So this is not random. It's directional, and that means where a phone connects actually matters. So once you understand that, then you're not looking at guesses anymore. You're looking at movement. And the first place that you see that is how this day actually begins.
Do you remember what time you got up on the morning of April 13th?
She had to be at work at 7, so approximately 6:30.
Okay. What'd you guys do when you got up?
We got up and drank coffee. She took a shower, got ready for work. We'd get in her Ford Expedition, and she would carry me to the silver PT Cruiser. Then she would go on to work.
And now what he said across.
And so that morning, you also you had some text messages going on. You texted, the first time you texted Angela Scott, it was at 6:50 in the morning. Does that sound about right?
If your records show that.
Okay, and then you texted her a second time at 6:51 in the morning?
If your records show that.
Okay.
Now, this is where the timeline separates from the story immediately. He describes a slow start to the morning, sitting, drinking coffee around 6:30. But the phone data gives you something fixed. At 6:50, his phone is already active, sending a text connected to a tower in Camden. Now, that's not passive. That's not someone sitting still. That's movement. That's engagement. So now the day doesn't begin where he says it does. It's already in motion. And that shift is important because once the timeline starts earlier, everything that follows has less time to fit. the window tightens. And as we've already seen, when the timeline tightens, the story has to adjust. The phone doesn't have to remember anything. It just records what happened. And this is where memory stops mattering, because now you have something that doesn't rely on it. And once the timeline shifts, the next question becomes where people actually are.
We traveled back. We set a course back. I look at my cell phone and I told him, I said, man, I need to get to hell to Benton County and meet Angela for lunch.
When I asked you about your kind of routine with her, when you weren't working, was that part of the routine?
When I wasn't working, she expected me to be at Benton County Health Department for with lunch, to spend with her through her lunch period.
She had, what, half an hour or so?
She had half an hour. She wanted me to get her something to eat and meet her there.
And on cross-examination,
Why were you eating lunch at the health department?
Health department was about 1/8 of a mile from her job.
Did you bring a lunch or were you buying a lunch at the health department?
I generally bought a lunch. I wasn't buying no lunch at the health department. I bought lunch at other places and met her at the health department.
Okay.
I've never met her.
You never what?
I never bought lunch at the health department.
Okay. But this was up in the city of Camden, is that right?
I don't know if it's the city limits or not.
But it's kind of close to where the main town is?
Yes, ma'am. It's off 641, just precisely right there off 641.
Okay, and then at 11:40, you called Jay Taylor again, don't you?
If your records reflect that.
What was the name I heard?
Jay Taylor?
Okay, there was chair creaking about the time I was driving here.
11:40, you called Jay Taylor, didn't you?
If your records reflect that, that'll be true.
You had a 45-second telephone call with him.
If your records reflect that, that'll be true.
And then at 12:06, Angela Scott called you.
If your records reflect that, that'll be true.
And at 12:08, Angela Scott called you again.
If your records reflect that, that'll be true.
And then Jay Taylor called you back at 12:09.
If your records reflect that, that'll be true.
So you had multiple contacts with Angela Scott during this day, didn't you?
I testified to the state that I didn't have time to get there and take her lunch, and that we spent the lunch hour talking and texting. That's correct.
So she usually only had a 30-minute lunch, is that right?
That's correct.
So if you met her, you said at 11 o'clock usually?
That's correct.
So you'd only need from 11 to 11:30 to have lunch with her, wouldn't you?
That's correct.
So what time are you saying then that you saw Zach Adams again?
I think I testified at 2:30, around 2:30.
So once we have the timeline anchored, the next thing that you have to account for is location, where someone actually is. Because in one version, he places himself with Angela, physically there, meeting her. But the phone records show something different, multiple calls, repeated attempts to reach her. And those two things don't line up, because calling someone isn't passive, it's intentional. It means you're trying to make contact, not standing next to them, not eating lunch with them. So now you have a conflict that cannot be explained by memory. You're either with someone or you're not. You're either with them or you're trying to reach them. And those don't happen at the same time. Once location stops being consistent, the rest of the timeline doesn't have anything stable to sit on. Location just doesn't shift like that. only the story can.
So you loaded Holly back up in the white Nissan Frontier.
That's correct.
You told the jury to take off back down the road.
Back down this, come out this way right here, get back on this road right here, back on this little gravel here. We driving just erratic, just panic, just pretty much, right?
But what happens from there?
We travel back is you want this back?
Not yet.
We travel back. We set a course back. I look at my cell phone and I told him, I said, man, I need to get to hell to Benton County and meet Angela for lunch.
Well, thank goodness for your cell phone expert. Thank goodness for Jonathan Reeves, who made it clear to the jury. Zach Adams was in Parsons at 11:16 in the morning. He made that clear to the jury.
Well, ma'am, that
Law
ATM footage
enforcement-
would have showed me sitting in that 2007 Silverado with Shane in the passenger seat, my brother possibly in the back.
Now you get something critical, a fixed point in time, 11 o'clock, lunch. That's not an estimate. That's a commitment, a time that he says he has to be somewhere. So once you have that, everything else in this story has to fit before it. The driving, the meetings, the murder, the events that he described happening that morning. All of it now has a deadline. And by that point, we're not guessing anymore about where people are. Zach's phone is accounted for. Shane's location is accounted for. Dylan is accounted for. These aren't open positions in a story. They're fixed. And it's important because the timeline is no longer open. It's bounded. From the moment that the day actually starts to the moment that he says he has to be somewhere else. And when you start placing those events inside that window, there just isn't enough room. The sequence compresses, the movements overlap, and the timeline starts to break under its own constraints, because once the timeline is fixed on both ends, then it doesn't matter how the story is told in the middle. It either fits or it doesn't. And when you don't have enough time to do what's being described, the problem is not the timeline, it's the story. So just step back for a second and look at what this story is asking you to accept. Because once you bring the phone data in, you're no longer dealing with a single timeline. You're dealing with at least three. Holly's phone is moving north, then east, then south, deliberate and directional. Zach's phone isn't. It stays pretty much anchored. It doesn't follow that movement. And Autry's phone starts somewhere else entirely, a totally different path, a different position, a different county. And at no point do those paths come together. They don't intersect. They don't converge. They remain separate. And that's the problem, because the story requires them to. It requires these people to be in the same place at the same time, moving through the same sequence of events. But the data shows separation, physical separation, devices that never meet, in a timeline that depends on them doing exactly that. So now, when you try to force this into a single sequence, when you try to make all of these movements line up, you don't just get inconsistencies, you run out of time. There's too much happening in too little time with people who are not where they need to be. So as we step back and look at what this story is asking us to accept, we got to realize that once you bring that phone data in, then you're no longer dealing with a single timeline. You're dealing with three timelines. Holly's phone moving, Zach's phone isn't. It doesn't follow the movement. There's just too much happening in too little time with people who are not where they need to be. So once you reach that point, you're no longer trying to understand the timeline anymore. You're trying to force it to exist because this does not fail at the edges. It fails at the center. And this is where the timeline stops being something that you can interpret and it becomes something that you can measure. Because once you account for the distance, the locations, and the time available, then you can calculate what would actually be required for the story to work. And what it would require is movement that isn't physically possible, speeds that do not exist on those roads, transitions that would have to happen faster than the time allows. You would have to compress distance, skip over space, or place people in multiple locations at once. And none of that can happen. So this isn't a matter of disagreement. It's not a matter of interpretation. It's simply constraint. Because when a timeline requires that kind of movement, it doesn't matter how detailed it sounds. It just cannot exist. And this isn't just theoretical. It's something that investigators had to acknowledge. And that includes former TBI investigator Terry Dicus when he said that for this timeline to work, you would have to accept movement that just simply is not possible in the physical world. So now let's do something different for a minute. Let's set the phones aside. Let's set the timeline aside. Let's ignore all of that and just look at the story as human behavior. Because even without any of the data, no timestamps, no towers, no movement, this still has to make sense as something that real people did. And this is where it starts to feel off.
So on the way back, it's your testimony that Zach Adams has shot Holly Bobo. You've heard birds flew. You heard a boat start up. You never saw the boat that you heard, did you?
That's correct.
You hear a boat start up that you don't see. You put the body back in the pickup truck, and Zach starts driving fast. You tell him, whoa, you need to slow down. And then as he's driving, you look at your phone and you say, I need to go. I need to meet Angela for lunch. Does that sound right?
That's correct.
Okay. Can you tell me specifically how that conversation went? Was there anything else to it?
There was not.
No? So do you say, please take me back to my car at some point?
I did not.
So he just naturally took you back to your car?
That's correct.
You got out of the car, no conversation when you got out of the car?
We had the conversation on the way back about how allegedly, or how he knew her and how she got back.
Okay, so tell me how that conversation unfolded.
I asked.
You said, how did you know her?
That's correct.
Were you more specific in your question, or?
I mean, that's
Can you tell
specific
me,
as it gets.
Can you tell me as best you can, word for word, what Mr. Adams said?
I can't tell you word for word
What's the best you can remember?
what I testified to.
Well, can you tell me again, please?
Mr. Adams said Natalie Bobo was stripping at the Interstate 40, prostituting, selling her body for drugs, and she had been coming down there at his house, having sex, and that she had showed pictures to Zach of victim Bobo, left the impression that she would join them, or he also said that.
Did Zach say that gave me
I
the...
object, you're still talking.
Let him finish.
He also said that the victim had been to his house.
Okay, so did Mr. Adams say it that way? Did he say, Natalie Bobo left me with the impression that the victim would...
I testified that I didn't know exactly word for word, but what I could remember of the conversation. As I told you before, I couldn't rehearse word for word. You asked me that I can't.
Okay, so that's the best you can remember.
Listen to the tone of that. the pacing, the way that he describes it. This isn't panic. It's not chaos. This isn't people reacting to something that just happened. It's controlled. It's measured. It's almost routine. And that's where it starts to break from reality, because in a situation like that, violent and sudden and completely out of control, the behavior doesn't settle into something calm. It escalates. It fragments. People rush. They make mistakes. They react. But that's not what you're hearing here. You're hearing something very structured, something steady, something that doesn't match the kind of moment that it's supposed to describe. So this is where it really starts to break, because according to this story, what just happened is extreme. It's violent. It's chaotic. It's life-altering. And yet, lunch is still on the schedule? That doesn't fit. Because in a situation like that, everything else stops. Plans don't hold. Schedules don't matter. The focus shifts completely. They just committed murder. They're thinking about getting away, to not being seen, to dealing with what just happened. But that's not what you're hearing. You're hearing someone still thinking in terms of routine, of ordinary life, as if nothing has fundamentally changed. And that disconnect between the event being described and the behavior that follows is impossible to reconcile. So think about what this story is asking you to accept. A group of people allegedly involved in a kidnapping, a sexual assault, and a murder. And their behavior is calm. It's conversational. They're keeping plans. They're moving from place to place. Like this is just another day. That's not how people act when something like this actually happens. Because in reality, behavior doesn't stay stable after an event like that. It totally breaks. It accelerates. People rush. People panic. They make mistakes. They don't think about their normal life because normal life is gone in that moment. And that's the disconnect. What's being described and how people are acting just don't belong in the same reality. And it's not just the tone.
No, I'm talking about a telephone conversation. You had a 2-minute, 32-second telephone conversation with Angela Scott that morning.
If your records reflect that, that'll be true.
You called Jay Taylor before you called Zach Adams, didn't you?
If your records show that, that's true.
So why would you then call him at 2:35 if you were already at his house?
Well, maybe I arrived at 2:38. I mean, I'm testifying that I got there around 2:35.
So why would you call him if you were already about to be there? Why did you call him a second time and talk to him? Why did you try to call him a second time?
Now, I don't recall that, but if your records reflect that, I'll agree that I made that call.
You said it was a try to be a forced move to get me to bear false witness against Zach Adams, didn't you?
If your records reflect that, I said that.
It's also the decision making. Think about the choices being described. Where they go, when they go, who they talk to, what they prioritize. None of it reflects urgency. None of it reflects fear of getting caught. None of it reflects people trying to contain what just happened. Because in a situation like that, decisions do not stay measured. They become reactive. They become compressed, focused on one single thing, not getting caught, getting away, not being seen, not being connected to it. But that's not what you're hearing. You're hearing decisions that stay very structured, predictable, almost normal. And that's the problem, because those choices do not align with the kind of event that's being described. They align with something else entirely. It reflects people who aren't reacting to reality. So now let's connect that back to what we just talked about. The timeline doesn't work. The phones don't line up. And now the behavior doesn't match either. So even if you set the data aside, you're still left with a story that does not behave like reality. And when a story fails the timeline, and it fails the evidence, and it fails basic human behavior, at some point, you've got to ask, what exactly are we listening to? Because that question is exactly what came up later. Now, up to this point, we've been working inside the testimony, comparing it, testing it, seeing where it holds and where it doesn't. But there's one more piece to this, and it's something that came later. Just last year, as a matter of fact, Jason Autry gave an interview in which he recanted. Like I said before, that interview was conducted by Dr. Katie Spirko, and she's a forensic and clinical neuropsychologist, and she works alongside Tennessee criminal defense attorney Dana McClendon III. Together, they produce the Trial and Error podcast, and they do a phenomenal job. I highly recommend it, dealing especially with this case. If you're interested in the Holly Bobo case, that Trial and Error podcast is really, really good. Now, in the interview, Autry says something that reframes everything that you've just heard. He says that the story that he told at trial was not based on memory. It was something that he put together using discovery materials, phone records, statements, all the information that he had access to at that time. Because years after the trial, Jason Autry gives this interview. So in that interview, when he talks about that day, the day that Holly was murdered, he says something else that matters. He says that he couldn't tell you what he did that day, other than whatever the phone records say. And on the surface, that might sound unusual, but time passes, details fade, people forget things. That's normal, especially if nothing substantial actually happened that day. But that's not what this is, because he's not describing memory that's incomplete. He's describing a memory that's been totally replaced with something external, something built from the record instead of something recalled from experience. So when you think about that, the timeline that we've been talking about, the movement, the sequence of events, he's saying none of it came from memory. It all came from data that was given to him. So now when we go back through everything that we just covered, the timeline that doesn't work, the routes that change, the phone activity that contradicts him, the behavior that doesn't make sense. If the story is being built to match the data instead of the data reflecting what actually happened, then that changes everything that we're looking at. Because now the question isn't, did he remember this correctly? The question becomes, was this story constructed to fit what was already known? And this is where something else comes into focus. Now, during the trial, the defense raises an issue about a proffer session, a multi-day meeting between Autry and investigators and the prosecution team. The state's position is that no notes were taken. They met for 3 days. Nobody took any notes. And now you have this, a story that Jason says was built in about 3 days. Are those the same 3 days? Well, we don't know, and there's no record that clearly connects them, but it is a question worth asking. Because if a story is being built using phone records, reports, what investigators already know, then what you're hearing in court isn't testimony. It's a contrived version of events. And now everything that we've talked about changes. The contradictions, the timeline, the behavior, they're not just problems anymore. They're indicators. Indicators that this story may not have come from memory at all. Because at its core, this case stands on a story told in court, accepted as fact, and used to explain everything else. And whether that story holds up matters more than anything else. So let's step back and look at what this case is built on. Dylan Adams' confession was not admitted at trial, but it was the catalyst, the starting point that directed investigators towards this group. And we've already walked through that confession and the problems inside it, the inconsistencies, the gaps, the way it unfolds under questioning. So we're not going to revisit all of that here. What matters is what it set in motion. Because now in this episode, we've done the same thing with Jason Autry's testimony. We've tested it, compared it, put it under pressure. And what you're left with are the same kinds of problems. Compared it to itself, compared it to another account, compared it to the timeline, compared it to behavior, and asked one question: does it hold up? And if you've followed along, you can see where the problems are. The contradictions, the pressure on the timeline, the conflicts that don't resolve. So now you're left with this: a confession that was never presented to a jury, and a testimony that raises serious questions when you test it. And at that point, the question isn't just what happened, it's what this case depends on. Because if the key pieces used to build the case don't hold up under scrutiny, then that matters. There are real outcomes tied to this: convictions, lives changed, lives lost, and people no longer here to speak for themselves. And all of it traces back to versions of events that don't align with each other and don't consistently align with the evidence. Because when everything else rests on a story, whether that story holds up matters more than everything else combined. And that's what makes this matter. And when you step back from all of this, it forces a question that's hard to ignore. Not about who someone is, not about whether they're a good person or a bad person, but about the standard that we're supposed to be holding. Because in this system, that's not what decides guilt. The evidence does. And whether the story holds up when you test it. And when you look at what this case is built on, a confession that never made it to a jury, and testimony that struggles under scrutiny, you have to ask, is that enough? Is that enough to take someone's freedom? Because that is the weight of it. Not opinion, not speculation, but consequence. And at the same time, finding out who didn't do this doesn't bring us any closer to who did. And that matters too, because at the center of all of this is still Holly Bobo. And the truth about what happened to her is what matters the most. And that's where we're going to leave it for now. If you've been following this case with me, I appreciate you being here. If you want to support the show, you can follow, share the episode, or join us on Substack, Patreon, Coffee. Everything helps keep this work going. Until next time, stay curious and don't stop asking questions.